All right, welcome back to Mr. Holloway's Foundational Python Skills Series. In this video, we're going to talk about for loops. Now, before we get started, if you like the video, go ahead and give it a like, as well as subscribe to the channel. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Class is now in session. Okay, so if you were watching my previous video, I talked about a while loop. And a lot of times the question becomes, when do you use a for loop versus versus a while loop. All right. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more towards the end because I want to focus on a for loop, and then we'll wrap up with why we would want to use a for loop versus a while loop. So let's just stay on a for loop for now. And I'm going to do just the basic structure of a for loop. It's a little different, but it's very useful. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for. I'm going to use the for keyword. And I'm going to say, actually, let's start with the list. We're going to actually iterate over a list. So what I want to do is have a list, and we'll do a list of sports. And we will, let me see, we'll do a list of sports. So we'll do basketball, we'll do soccer, and we'll do football, and we'll do one more. We'll do volleyball. All right, now volleyball. Okay, so one of the things that loops help with is repetition. So as you know, in the previous video I made, there was a concept called dry, which is do not repeat yourself. So it would be dry, D-R-Y, do not repeat yourself. All right. Now, let's say I wanted to print this whole list just using print statements. So I could say print, and I could say sports, and then 0, right, index 0, and then I could just go on and on and on, and I could just have the whole list, do 1, and then 2, and then index 3, and that would print the whole list. All right, so that is okay, but it's very inefficient. And if you can see, we see some repetitive code here. So we want to fix that. We don't want to use print statements to print everything out, because what if the list had 1,000 items in it or 500,000? We won't want to do these print statements. So we're going to make this a little easier. We're going to use a for loop. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a for loop. I'm going to say for. And I'm going to just make this variable. I'm going to call it items just for demonstration purposes for now. And I'm going to say 4 items in sports. Okay. So what this basically says, for every item in sports, do something. And so what we want to do is we want to do print items. All right. And I think that's all we need. And so go ahead and run, and then boom, there you go. So again, this would say for every item in sports, print the item. Now, this is cool, and it's very helpful. Again, it will prevent us from having to print every single item in the list. Now, again, I could just add another sport. I could say golf, and it's going to loop through the list again. All right, so that's one example of how we can use a for loop. The other one I want to show you is where we can basically just not even use a list. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this list. And what we can do is, let's say we want it to run a specific amount of times. We can just say use the range function. Now the range function I'm going to make a separate video for, but I just want to do this real quick. So we're going to do the range, and what we want to do is we want to say let's just print all the items. All right, so everything, which is basically just going to print a bunch of numbers. Okay, so the range function will just ensure that we're going to run this 10 times. And all right, let's stop, and then let's clear, and then let's run, and then we print 0, 1, 2, 0 all the way to 9. Actually, you know what? I'm going to cover this range function right now. Yeah, no, well, actually, I'll make a separate video because I do need to explain, get in a little bit more in depth to why this prints 0 to 9. But I'll make that my next video. So we're going to cover that, the range function, in the next video. All right, now that's one thing you can do. Now here's something else that we could do. I want to show you how we can actually use a conditional statement inside of the range. So what I could say is I could just say, hey, I'm sorry, inside of the function, I could say if items is equal to 5, I could say print found, and I could just say item. Yeah, we can do items. Okay, so let's see what that yields. So again, for every item in range 10, if items is equal to 5, print found items, and let's see what we get. And there it is. And so it basically searches through these numbers, and once it gets to that number, it prints what it has found. And so you can use conditional statements inside of there. Now the last thing I want to show you is just a simple sequence. So a sequence is just a string, and I could say hello world. Okay, now again, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but loops are really good for iterating over sequences. And so a sequence could be it could be something like a string, it could be a list, a set, tuple, dictionary, something like that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to basically iterate over this. I'm going to say print item. Okay, and so stop, and then clear, and then run. And then if you notice, this will iterate over this string sequence. And so that's where we get, that's how we get this. And then also notice that the blank space is this blank space here. So we'll print that as well. Now, the last thing I do want to cover on this is this part right here. So this is simply just a variable. So we could change it to X, and everything would just work the same. It's just, this is just a variable. The reason why I used items is because I wanted to demonstrate how, in plain English, as close as I could, of how you can iterate through each item, or you can do something to each item. All right, I wanted to come back to the question of when you should use a for loop versus when you use a while loop. In a previous video, I covered while loops. In this video, I covered a for loop. So we're going to discuss that. Now, so let's take a look at these two loops. So I have a while loop here, and I have set the initiator, the initial value of X to 0. And the condition is, as long as X is less than 11, we want you to print the number, basically. And we're going to just iterate that. Now, without the iterator, if you remember, we will have an infinite loop, which will be a problem because we don't want that in this case. Now, for the for loop, we have basically a collection, which is a list of items. So we know ahead of time how many items we have, and we're just going to loop through and print them. So let's just go ahead and run these. And so this, these numbers here, 0 through 10, are going to be the result of the while loop, and then printing out the list is the result of the for loop. Okay. The question is when do we use a for loop? When do we use a while loop? Well, it's simple. You use a while loop when you don't know. So you don't know ahead of time, ahead of what you have. Or in other words, as long as a condition is true. So as long as this condition is true, you just want to iterate ahead of time. So you just want to go ahead and iterate through whatever you want to do here. So we want to print, you want to run code, whatever it is, you want to just run that until this condition is true. Now for a for loop, it's a little different. And it's best for sequences when we know what we have ahead of time. So for example, in the sports, we know that there's going to be a list. Now this list could be 50 items long, 100, 1,000, 2, whatever. But we know ahead of time that there's going to be a finite amount of items in this list. And so we can just go ahead and print that specifically for the list. So for example, any kind of sequence, a list, a tuple, a set, a dictionary, a list of a sequence of letters, those are usually best for a for loop. So in other words, for a for loop, it's like a shopping list. So you have a finite list of items that you want to go through, and you know that those items aren't going to change. That is the shopping list that you brought with you to the store. You can look at a while loop. It's kind of like catching fish. So you can go fishing in a pond, and you're going to catch a fish. You're going to keep fishing until you catch a fish, right? You don't necessarily know when you're going to catch a fish, but you're going to keep fishing until you actually catch the fish. And so that's kind of just the general idea behind when to use a for loop and when not to use a for loop. But in review, generally use for loops for sequences, and for while loops you use them while a condition is true. Now the last thing about a for loop and a while loop is that just remember you could actually use both in certain conditions. It won't be wrong, but sometimes things are just a little bit more efficient to use maybe a while loop or a for loop, but you could use either or in certain situations, so it doesn't necessarily matter. It just really comes down to efficiency. Alright, so that concludes this video. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.